Bielfeldt, president of the Institute of Lutheran Theology, and this is the second lecture on the Old Academy. The Old Academy being that academy at Athens that was founded by Plato. And last lecture we talked about his nephew, Speusippus, and how they may have had different views. There, again, is some evidence to suggest that the two really did get into some philosophical feuds. So it must have been an exciting time to have lived to be at that academy at that time. And in this lecture, we're going to see how Aristotle shows up, and we have some of the greatest minds that ever thought philosophically right at that time and place. The next thinker I want to talk about is Xenocrates. He became the head of the academy in 339. He was a student of Plato as well, probably less original than Speusippus. He identifies the one with nous, and of course it's always what is the ontological status of the one, which is of course sometimes called the monad. You'll see that in literature. He seems to identify Xenocrates nous, which is a mind, or with the one, and he identifies the dyad with primordial matter then, right? We got the one equals nous, then we got the dyad gets identified with matter. You probably can't see that, but that's all right. I'll get out there next time. So anyway, if you identify the dyad with the primordial matter, then you have nous imposing itself on matter as the one relates to the dyad. He thought that the forms were thoughts in the mind of the one, and that is kind of a significant thought, actually. We're going to see in the development of Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism this happening. But I mean, you've got the forms. Of course, for Plato, these seem to exist outside of any mind. And then you had, of course, the demiurge, which takes the forms and imposes it in the receptacle. But here now, we have a place, it seems, where forms are. And if this is what Xenocrates thought, it certainly is a pretty powerful thought that the forms have to be thought by something, right? Because they're ideas, eidos, and so the forms are thought by nous. The one here associates with the indefinite dyad. Of course, the one is nous, associates with the indefinite dyad. Now, it seems in Xenocrates this is the unequal, and through this association, there are, here we go again, numbers, lines, planes, solids, and all perceptible things. Now, the next point here is just this, that there seemed to be a disagreement in these days between the ontological status of different kinds of numbers. Plato held to formal numbers, that is, to each natural number there would be a form of it, and so there would be as many, he held that there were these numbers associated with numerals, and then mathematical numbers which don't have a form associated with it in the same way, which nonetheless can be added. Anyway, Speusippus really kind of course, downplays the forms again because he's criticizing Plato's theory of forms, so he criticizes it with respect to the forms of numbers and would only allow for mathematical numbers. However, Xenocrates has no problems with forms and no problems with formal numbers. So he held that magnitudes were indivisible. Wow. Just think of that. Can't divide it. The universe unfolds as forms equal numbers. And then we have lines, planes, solids in motion, perceptible objects. A bit of redundancy here, but making the point. He divides the cosmos and places the demons between heaven and earth. Now, when you hear in Greek demons, don't think of them as little creatures in Dante's Inferno. The demons are between humans and gods. Maybe the closest analog would be an angel, something like that. Sometimes called heroes, right? But at any rate, he has a great chain of being going here. And this might be a time to talk about the great chain of being. Classically, of course, great chain of being runs this way. You have at the top of the great chain of being those things with maximum being, and at the bottom of the great chain of being, those things with minimum being. Well, of course, up here you have goodness, because goodness has maximum being, and then down here you have absence of goodness. Now you could say, well, is that evil? Well, Augustine very famously said that evil was the absence of good because he was a good Neoplatonic, right, on this point. Do you really want to say that evil has an independent ontological status? If everything is created by God, then perhaps goodness can evaporate under the order of the fall, but is it the case that evil can be a positive thing? Where would it have its source? So questions like this. At any rate, going on, we have God up here, then we have the demons or the angels, then we have man. I'll use man, I could say human beings. If I ever use the word man, I'm not a sexist guy. Then we have the higher animals, and we have the lower animals, snakes. I always put cockroaches down here. Never been fond of the little guys, although they say they'll survive nuclear attack. Then we have other kinds of beings, and finally, I suppose stones, something with matter, but having very little being. And the idea of the great chain of being is that, in some sense, everything participates in that which is above it. So we have being, cosmos, up here, demons, earth. So we have heaven. Here now we're talking about Xenocrates. Heaven, demons, earth, where man and woman is. It's all very interesting, and we see it presaged back here. He divided entities into the perceptible and the intelligible and the believable. Of course, we have for Plato two classes, right? We have that which we have opinion of and that which we know. So it seems like Xenocrates is doing the emendation of this. This tripartite division is indeed an emendation of Plato's divided line. We talked about the divided line. Of course, we have these two. We know what we believe, and of course, what we know has two various kinds of knowing, if you will, the mathematical forms, and then the higher forms to the form of the good. And then what we believe, we have shadows, and then perceptible objects. He seems to have held that the good life and the happy life are the same thing, and that the happy man has a good soul. Well, there was another guy hanging around in those days before he went and started his own school. Probably, again, we want to look at the top three thinkers of all time in philosophy. We would probably look at Aristotle and Plato as two of those three, maybe. Some might dispute Plato. I don't think anybody could dispute Aristotle. The influence of Aristotle is just astounding on everything we say and think and do here in the West. He seems to have understood the Timaeus literally and not mathematically, like Speusippus and Xenocrates. He denies the demiurge and the notion that the forms can cause reality through it. Now, what am I saying there? Well, we hear the word cause, right? And when we hear the word cause, we think like little Newtons, right? And so we might say, well, there's this event here, event 2, and somehow it's causally relevant or causally efficacious in bringing about event 3. And this event usually has a physical body within it, this event state. By the way, that's a very difficult question too, the ontological status of events, whether or not there are such things. But anyway, we'll say there's an event, and it causes another event. There's some physical change here, which brings about some physical change there. But of course, in the tradition, the word cause, as we say it in English, and related words in other languages, didn't just mean this, right? The cause gets a connotation of the reason why something is as it is a cause of it. So obviously for Plato, the cause of old Dobbin, the horse, has something to do with the form of horseness, right? Because the form of horseness, in some sense, is that which bestows upon old Dobbin its horsicity, the technical term in philosophy, horsicity, right? Okay. So he denies the demiurge and wants to, because the demiurge, of course, is taking the forms up here, and the forms are causing this movement in the world down here. But how does this, which has being but is not physical, cause things in the world that are physical? By the way, this question is a fundamental question in all of philosophy. It hasn't really been solved yet. And I don't know if it can ever be solved. But how is it that non-physical things could ever cause a physical thing? How could a form cause a physical object? Well, Alfred North Whitehead, in his Process in Reality, talks about prehending the forms, and this prehension of the forms is part of the metaphysical condition by which a particular thing is. But this prehension is not a physical cause. And of course, many people would say, well, what's the ontological status of a prehension? Is there such a thing? Well, these are all deep questions. Aristotle rejects seemingly the mathematical basis of reality. He's much less prone to Pythagorean thinking, much less impressed by mathematics, perhaps more impressed by his empirical studies of objects. And he introduces a circular motion known as the fifth element from which heavenly bodies emerge. So we got 4 elements, right? We got earth, fire, air, and water. Now we have a 5th element, which is a circular movement. Aristotle identifies the receptacle with the hela, material substrate. Remember, for Aristotle, there is matter from which all things are made. And Aristotle's reading of the Timaeus certainly appears in the subsequent tradition of the Academy. His principle is this: only bodies can act on bodies. Right? This is a denial that the forms can really do anything. Might be some nice thoughts guys have, but to bring about a thing, there has to be a physical cause. Now, we could certainly, this question of the final cause in Aristotle could be taken up here, but I'm not going to take it up at this point. I'm just going to stand on that statement for now. The Stoics assumed this as well in interpreting the time Timaeus. So they seem to go along with Aristotle. We have a new thinker to think about. This thinker is Polemo, who seems to have lived for 83 years. Notice most of these guys had pretty long lives. Most of them are up close to 80 years old. He became the headmaster in 314. We have no surviving texts, no reliable comments about his views. He seems to be a transitional figure to Stoicism. Now, what happens in the Academy is that we have this great philosophical academy, but of course we have a movement towards Stoicism. And Stoicism is an ancient view, ancient philosophical system that holds that the logos is involved in all activity, ordering it. This is probably our basis of natural law. We get out of Stoicism, and certainly its influence on the understanding of Christian tradition. Anyway, Stoicism holds very famously that it is easier to change one's mind about the universe or the world than it is to change the world, so that the individual human being should bring his thinking or her thinking into accordance with the logos, and in so doing, understand that there's a certain necessity flowing through things, and not to seek for that which is not. And my favorite Stoic was always Spock on the original Star Trek episodes. He was certainly a Stoic guy. Well, Polemo seems to be moving in this direction when he says that all living beings seek a conciliation with their environment, right? So the basic problem of human existence and life is that we get a bit out of whack with the natural governing order of things. And if we can have a consonance with that natural ordering of things, we will be happy. So happiness is tied to living in accordance with nature. So we have the Academy, and we have Plato, right? The Academy, Plato, all the big guys. But as we have different developments there, we have Stoicism developing, figures at the Academy associated with this, but of course Stoicism was other places as well. And then we're going to see at the end of the Academy, we come to a skepticism. And then shortly after that, the Academy closes, and when it reopens, it goes back to Plato. Seeking the font of things, ad fontes. Our next thinker for your cogitation is Philip of Opus. Could be Philip of Menda. He was an astronomer and a mathematician. He advocated contemplation of the celestial bodies as highest wisdom. Now, this is a shift from dialectic to contemplation. Now, you're saying, well, what is all this about? Well, for Plato, thought is always in motion, right? In order to come to knowledge of things, it's a back and forth movement of thinking, and in this back and forth movement of thinking, you finally arrive at the first principle as you converse with others or think these things through deeply. And of course, philosophers have written, does Plato really ever have thought? Can we talk about Platonic thought, or should we talk about Platonic thinking, right? Because Plato's always in motion, thinking things through, trying to find those first principles. Aristotle works with dialectic, modifies it a bit. We'll talk about that when we talk about Aristotle. But with Philip of Opus, we find that this dialectic, this back and forth movement, dynamism, is replaced by a kind of a repose, a rest, a contemplation in the highest things. Philip of Opus seems to have followed Plato in his laws. We didn't talk about this, but the world soul shows up in the laws in a different way than in the Timaeus. And he declared that the world soul was perhaps evil. And Philip of Opus went this far. We see that there is, in general, a movement towards regarding materiality as a source of evil, illusion, and that kind of thing. He may have been the author of the Epinomus, the 13th book, many think he was, of Plato's Laws, which are in 12 books. Now, this next character, this is one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. This guy was brilliant. Eudoxus of Cnidus. And I've read a little bit in the history of mathematics, and ancient mathematics really goes back to this guy, Eudoxus. Greatest mathematician prior to Archimedes, studied at the Academy when he was 23. Claimed that the Earth was at the center of the universe, around which there were 27 concentric circles. This later certainly gets modified, and we end up with the so-called Ptolemaic system. His mathematical work may have been at the root of large sections of Euclid's Elements. Nobody here should think that Euclid just sat down and wrote out the elements. He was collecting all kinds of material together and editing it. And in general, in the ancient world, of course, people weren't so concerned about who gets credit for things, right? What was of most concern is that things were known, and so a fellow like Euclid could collect all kinds of materials without elaborate footnoting, and everybody else the same way. Eudoxus could be considered the father of scientific astronomy, and certainly important for the development of the analytical method. Seemed to have been an early practitioner of analysis, the method of exhaustion in mathematics. He claimed that both rational and irrational living beings aim towards pleasure, and argued that the forms reside in material. And I don't know exactly how that would be, but he claimed it. So we're running through these characters quickly, but what you should get from this lecture is that there's all kinds of guys thinking thoughts, and there's a real intellectual climate here. And the point of all this is to show you that there's an intelligentsia. There's an academic tradition of thinking that is long, and indeed, if we go from Plato to basically the end of Neoplatonism, we're talking about 9 centuries of thinking, 900 years. So these guys had tremendous influence. Heraclitus of Pontus, probably a student of Plato, influenced by Pythagorean thought. He claimed, there's a picture of him there, actually. Soul's no, they didn't take it with a camera. The soul is composed of ether, highest material element. He claimed that the earth rotates once a day. That was pretty smart. And then he claimed the universe was infinite. Next guy on our hit parade, Crantor of Soli, 350 to 275. So he wasn't a student of Plato, he was a student of Plato's student, Xenocrates. Now we're moving towards a Stoic views here. All pain and grief is necessary and must be endured. He created the literary genre of consolation. Philosophy can give consolation because it can allow us to have the wisdom to live in accordance with what is, and to have our expectations in accordance with what is. Life is punishment. Death is release from this. Of course, you find this a little bit in Plato, right? When Socrates died, we're going to sacrifice a cock at his death, to sacrifice this male, a chicken, right, to the god of sickness, because Socrates has overcome the sickness of life and death. So it's right there. And indeed, I've said before that for much of Plato, I think you have to read him as giving us a preparation for dying. And that's what a lot of ancient philosophy did. Crantor's Timaeus commentary claims that Plato held that there is no temporal beginning to the universe and to the soul. Okay, now we're almost to the end of this rather long lecture. We want to talk about the New Academy. The New Academy is actually at the end of the Old Academy. The New Academy, term that goes along with skepticism, the Old Academy. Arcesilaus, Carneades, both skeptics. You can see that Arcesilaus lived from 315 to 240. He was influenced by Pyrrhonian skepticism. Now you have to distinguish between academic skepticism and Pyrrhonian skepticism. Academic skepticism said that we don't know things, but we do know one thing, and that is that we don't know. Pyrrhonian skepticism says we don't know things, and we don't even know that we don't know. So it is academic skepticism on steroids. So Arcesilaus initiated the skeptical phase at the academy. No knowledge or certainty through the senses. He attacked Stoic epistemology, and he might be said to be the founder of the New Academy. Well, what about Stoic epistemology? What is he attacking? Well, the Stoics certainly talked a great deal about what you might call representations that were self-authenticating. We might, in modern way, talk about this as the given, that we have certain foundational experiences that are that upon which other things are based. And so in classical epistemological foundationalism, we have to have our foundations in the given. These experiences that cannot be other than what they are, we're having them, so we build up our knowledge from these representations. And the skeptics claimed that this kind of self-authenticating representation is not the kind of thing that one can build anything upon. They are not foundations. They're chimerical. They are illusions. They are transitory. They are caused by many things, but they are not the kind of thing that one can build knowledge about. Carneades mitigated, that means softens or mollifies, Arcesilaus's positions on skepticism. He allowed for well-founded opinions, moving a bit towards a probabilism with respect to epistemology, and he again attacked this foundationalism that they saw as part of Stoicism. Okay, the academy is now getting ready to be closed. It ceased to operate in Athens after Philo of Larissa. We normally say Philo, but actually in the Greek it'd be better to say Philo of Larissa, who left around 85 BC. So at that point, we're going to take a break here from this lecture, and we'll get now into early Middle Platonism. More to come. Thank you.